Ava Delaney was the kind of woman who lit up every room, and Harper Quinn knew it better than anyone. So when Ava vanished after a night at a Maui beach bar, Harper's instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. Dylan Cross, the charming local dive instructor, had been the last to see her alive, but it wasn't until a shallow grave was discovered 9 days later that the truth began to surface, and it pointed to something far more calculated. As Detective Eli Navarro dug deeper, the picture darkened. Ava hadn't just disappeared. She had been hunted. Ava Delaney had always been drawn to the water. Her social media pages were filled with videos of crashing waves, slow-motion twirls on sandy shores, and sun-drenched selfies that made thousands envy her travels. She wasn't just another influencer. She had a rare authenticity that made her content feel personal. When she booked a solo trip to Maui, it was meant to be both work and escape. She was recovering from a quiet breakup and needed the ocean to cleanse more than just her timeline. Ava arrived on a Tuesday and checked into the Kayak Cove Resort, a hidden gem nestled along the island's less commercialized northern edge. It was tranquil, private, and surrounded by thick greenery that gave the place a dreamlike seclusion. Her posts during the first few days were filled with cheerful updates: fresh coconut breakfasts, long hikes through bamboo forests, and late afternoons lounging beside the resort's pool. Each day ended with sunset shots that her followers eagerly anticipated. On day 4, Ava posted an image that would later be dissected frame by frame. She was seated at a beach bar, holding a bright turquoise cocktail, smiling with the golden hour glow brushing her skin. Behind her, slightly out of focus, was a man in a patterned Hawaiian shirt, leaning casually at the counter. His face wasn't entirely visible, but his posture suggested confidence, ease, and familiarity with the setting. That photo was time-stamped 8:47 p.m. It was the last post Ava would ever make. When Harper Quinn, Ava's closest friend, noticed the silence, she immediately felt uneasy. Harper and Ava had been inseparable for years. Though their lives had diverged, Harper worked a high-stress corporate job in Los Angeles and rarely traveled. They spoke every day. Ava had even shared her itinerary with Harper before leaving, as a safety precaution. After 24 hours with no messages, Harper began to worry. When she called the resort, the front desk confirmed that Ava had not returned to her room the night before and had missed a snorkeling excursion she had booked for the morning. Her room was untouched, her luggage unpacked, her phone charger still plugged into the wall. Harper didn't wait. She got on the next flight to Maui. By the time she landed, she had already filed a missing person report and contacted the local police. At the Wailuku precinct, Detective Eli Navarro took the case. He was known for being methodical, soft-spoken, and unrelenting once his instincts locked onto something. He began by reviewing security footage from the resort and nearby establishments. The beach bar camera showed Ava chatting with the man in the Hawaiian shirt around 9:20 p.m. They laughed, leaned in close, and he offered her a drink. Just after 10 p.m., they were seen leaving together, heading down a lit path that led toward the beach. That was the last visual confirmation of Ava's whereabouts. The man was identified as Dylan Cross, a local dive instructor with a reputation for charming tourists. His record included a few public intoxication citations, but nothing serious. When Navarro interviewed him, Dylan claimed that he and Ava took a walk on the beach, then parted ways when she said she was tired. His story was vague, but not implausible. There were no witnesses to contradict it. However, Harper's instincts screamed otherwise. She started scouring Dylan's online presence. His public accounts showed countless beach photos and tagged friends, but one name stood out: Sophie Merritt. Harper remembered Sophie's face from a cold case she had read about months earlier, a missing tourist who vanished under similar circumstances. Sophie had been vacationing in Maui. She too had been last seen with Dylan Cross. Navarro reopened the Merrick file. The pattern was too familiar to ignore. Meanwhile, on the sixth day of Ava's disappearance, a fisherman discovered torn pieces of a floral dress tangled in branches near a cliff. The fabric matched what Ava had been wearing in her final photo. Navarro organized a search party with dogs, drones, and volunteers. On the ninth day, the dogs led the team to a densely wooded area just outside the resort's boundary. Hidden beneath a patch of loosened earth, covered with palm fronds, was a shallow grave. Inside, forensic teams confirmed, was Ava Delaney. Her body was partially decomposed from the heat, but the evidence was intact: abrasions on her arms, fibers under her nails, and a shattered wristwatch that was not hers. The resort paradise had turned into a crime scene. Harper watched in stunned silence as Ava's body was carefully removed, the weight of grief settling into her bones. But in that moment of heartbreak, Harper and Navarro both knew one thing. Someone had gone to great lengths to make Ava disappear, and now the truth was beginning to surface. Detective Navarro stood at the edge of the dig site, staring at the disturbed earth where Ava Delaney had been found. The forensic team moved with practiced silence, collecting samples from beneath her fingernails, photographing every angle, brushing the soil from her skin with care. Her body had been placed in the ground hastily, barely concealed by loose leaves and dry palm fronds. It was clear the killer hadn't expected anyone to find her this soon. The tropical sun had already begun to accelerate decomposition, but there was enough left to preserve the story her body told: defensive wounds on her hands, marks along her wrists, and bruising on her jawline. She had fought back. Navarro returned to the station with a grim determination. His next step was to re-interview Dylan Cross, this time with more pressure and a sharper focus. Dylan had maintained his innocence during the first interview, but now the facts were closing in. Navarro obtained a warrant to search Dylan's rented bungalow, located just a few miles from the resort. The interior was sparsely furnished, filled with cheap surf gear, empty beer bottles, and the faint scent of mildew. In the bedroom closet, tucked behind a duffel bag, they found a torn strip of floral fabric, identical to the dress Ava had been wearing. Hidden in the bathroom trash bin was an empty, travel-sized bottle of bleach. Navarro also recovered a sand-encrusted wristwatch under the bed, matching the broken piece found in the grave. Dylan was arrested later that evening at a beachside cafe. He didn't resist, but his expression was hollow, as if he'd already prepared for this moment. In custody, he asked for a lawyer and said nothing more. The community, once quiet and trusting, erupted in whispers. Some had known Dylan for years, seen him give scuba lessons, watched him flirt with tourists at bars without a hint of danger. Others now recalled uneasy moments, times when he seemed to linger too long or stare too intensely. Slowly, a pattern emerged: conversations with women who later left the island abruptly or stopped responding to messages. There had always been gaps, but nothing concrete. Until Ava, back in Los Angeles, Harper was unraveling. The grief hit in waves, sudden, cold, and impossible to stop. She couldn't understand how someone so full of life could be taken so violently. Yet beneath her sorrow was a pulsing need for answers. She met again with Navarro, who now regarded her as more than just a grieving friend. Harper had a knack for noticing details, following threads that others might miss. Together, they began to piece together Dylan's movements leading up to Ava's disappearance. Credit card transactions revealed he had purchased heavy-duty trash bags, latex gloves, and a tarp from a hardware store the morning after Ava went missing. His cell phone location history showed a drive to a remote cliff area that same day, exactly where Ava's body had been found. But the most chilling piece of evidence came from Dylan's old laptop, seized during the search of his bungalow. It had been wiped recently, but the digital forensics team recovered fragments of deleted files. Among them was a folder containing photos and videos of several women, some unconscious, others seemingly unaware they were being recorded. One of the videos dated back nearly 3 years and showed Sophie Merrick, the tourist who had vanished in 2022. The footage was enough to reopen her cold case and build a much darker portrait of who Dylan Cross really was. That as Harper read the case file on Sophie, she noticed striking similarities. Both women had arrived in Maui alone. Both had stayed in boutique resorts and posted cheerful updates on social media. Both had been last seen with Dylan. Harper started to believe Ava's death might not have been an isolated act of violence, but the final act in a series of crimes that had gone unnoticed for too long. Dylan hadn't just chosen Ava randomly. He had a type, a method, a timeline. It was premeditated. News of the arrests spread quickly, reaching national headlines within days. Photos of Ava's smiling face were broadcast beside mugshots of Dylan. The contrast between light and dark as stark as it could be. The island that had once promised peace and beauty was now marked by horror. But for Harper, justice had only begun. Ava deserved more than headlines. She deserved truth. As Navarro continued building the case, Harper promised herself she would uncover everything, every woman, every lie, every cover-up. The shallow grave had revealed one truth, but there were others still buried. Dylan Cross sat in a holding cell at the Maui County Correctional Center, staring at the cinderblock wall like it might offer a way out. His demeanor had shifted from confident to cold. He had refused to speak since his arrest, and his court-appointed lawyer was already preparing a defense built on denial and insufficient evidence. But Detective Navarro knew they had more than enough to keep him in custody. Still, something about the case felt incomplete. The physical evidence tied Dylan to Ava's death, but the motive was still unclear. Why Ava? Why bury her so carelessly? And what had really happened in those final moments after they left the bar together? Navarro requested a deeper dive into Dylan's history. He contacted police departments in California and Washington, where Dylan had previously lived. A few minor incidents surfaced: a bar fight in San Diego, a restraining order filed by a former girlfriend in Seattle, but nothing that had led to prosecution. Dylan had drifted from place to place over the years, never staying long enough to draw attention, always finding work near the ocean. Surf instructor, dive guide, lifeguard. He blended into beach communities like he belonged there. It was a calculated existence that allowed him access to women who were far from home, distracted by vacation, and surrounded by strangers. Meanwhile, Harper Quinn remained on the island, refusing to leave until the full truth was uncovered. She spent her days helping Detective Navarro and her nights in the silence of Ava's untouched resort room. The scent of sunscreen and salt water lingered on Ava's clothes, and her journal sat open on the bedside table, filled with notes for future video ideas. One entry caught Harper's eye, a quick paragraph scribbled beneath a list of local bars. Ava had written, "Talked to a local today, Dylan. He offered to show me a secret beach tomorrow morning. Should I go? Probably not alone." The entry was dated the morning of the day she vanished. Harper showed it to Navarro, and it became another piece in the puzzle. Ava had considered seeing Dylan again after that first night. Whether she changed her mind or was forced to go with him was still unknown, but it confirmed he had planned to see her again. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was something darker. Then came a break no one expected. A woman named Riley Torres, a travel blogger from Texas, reached out to Harper after seeing her interview on the news. Riley had visited Maui a year earlier and had met a man named Dylan at the same beach bar. She described an unsettling encounter where he followed her from the bar to her resort after she declined his invitation for a late-night swim. She remembered feeling watched and receiving strange messages from an unknown number during the remainder of her trip. She had reported it to hotel staff, but nothing ever came of it. Navarro arranged for Riley to fly in and provide an official statement. Her testimony further supported the pattern. Dylan had approached women on vacation, charmed them, and escalated quickly when rejected. Riley had escaped, but others might not have. Navarro now believed Dylan's crimes could stretch back years, possibly to other islands or coastal towns where missing persons cases had gone cold. He contacted the FBI to widen the investigation, and they began cross-referencing unsolved cases with Dylan's known locations. The scope of the case expanded rapidly. The media dubbed him the beach predator. Tourists questioned their safety, and the island's tourism board went into crisis mode. But for Harper, the headlines didn't matter. What mattered was exposing the full extent of Dylan's actions. She pored over every photo, every post Ava had made, looking for anything that might reveal a connection to other victims. That's when she noticed something strange. In one of Ava's beach photos, taken 2 days before her death, a shadow could be seen in the distance, someone standing alone near the tree line. Zoomed in, the figure appeared to be holding a camera. It wasn't just a passing stranger. Someone had been watching her long before that night at the bar. Navarro sent the image to the forensic team, who enhanced the resolution as much as possible. The outline was fuzzy, but the shape of the camera was clear. Dylan hadn't met Ava by chance. He had been following her, possibly for days, waiting for the right moment. The evidence confirmed what Harper feared most. Ava had been targeted. Her death wasn't random. It had been planned. And now, the investigators knew they were dealing not just with a murderer, but a predator who had hunted in plain sight, hiding behind the charm of paradise. Detective Navarro stood before a wall, covered in photos, maps, and timelines, each piece pinned with color-coded notes connecting Dylan Cross to Ava Delaney and possibly several other women. The investigation had grown beyond anything he initially expected. It was no longer about solving one murder. It was about uncovering how many times Dylan had gotten away with it. Navarro's team, along with the FBI, worked around the clock, analyzing years of travel data, flight manifests, rental agreements, and hotel bookings. Wherever Dylan had worked or vacationed, the agents searched for reports of missing women, assaults, or strange encounters. The connections were murky, but unmistakable. Dylan had moved from place to place like a tide, arriving quietly, leaving just before anyone noticed something was wrong. In Maui, the pressure to close Ava's case intensified. Prosecutors began preparing for trial, but they needed more than circumstantial evidence to ensure Dylan stayed behind bars. The surveillance footage, witness statements, and forensic finds were solid, but it was the digital forensics that held the real weight. Deep within Dylan's wiped laptop, technicians recovered a second hidden directory. Inside were timestamps, GPS logs, and unsettling images. Dozens of them. Photos of women taken without their knowledge, on beaches, in resort lobbies, through windows. Some dated back over 5 years. A few matched women who had gone missing. The photos confirmed that Ava wasn't his first victim. She was the first one they found. Among the recovered files was a video fragment, grainy, with distorted audio, but it showed Ava, looking confused, seated on a blanket near a cliffside. Her movements were sluggish. Investigators believed she had been drugged. The timestamp matched the night she disappeared. That single piece of footage changed everything. It showed Dylan not just as a killer, but as someone who documented his crimes, possibly for his own gratification. The footage could finally place him at the crime scene and suggest premeditation. For prosecutors, it was the smoking gun. Meanwhile, Harper Quinn remained in Maui, refusing to return home until the trial began. She had become a central figure in the case, both emotionally and publicly. News outlets requested interviews daily, but Harper declined most of them. She spent her time assisting Navarro's team, speaking with other women who had come forward, and supporting the families of the possible earlier victims. Grief had changed her, but it hadn't broken her. She carried Ava's memory with her like armor. One afternoon, Harper received a letter hand-delivered to her hotel. No return address. Inside was a single photo, Ava on the beach, smiling at the camera. But this wasn't a photo she had ever seen before. It wasn't on Ava's social media, and it hadn't been in her phone. It had been taken from a distance, likely by Dylan, and sent now as a cruel reminder of what had been lost. The image shook Harper, not because of what it showed, but because it meant someone had access to the investigation's restricted materials, or worse, that Dylan had shared these images with someone else. Navarro brought the photo to the FBI tech team, who discovered embedded metadata linking it to a burner email address, traced to an IP log just 3 days earlier from a public library in Honolulu. The implication was chilling. Dylan hadn't acted alone, or someone had copied and stored his files before his arrest. The theory of a second individual, an accomplice, enabler, or admirer, entered the investigation. Navarro began rechecking Dylan's communication records, visitor logs, and jail correspondence. One name kept recurring: Caleb Rowan, a fellow dive instructor and longtime friend of Dylan's. Caleb had never been interviewed because he had been out of town during Ava's disappearance, attending a certification seminar on another island. But now, investigators weren't so sure. Caleb and Dylan had worked together at dive shops in 3 different locations. They had traveled together often and posted beachside photos going back years. Harper remembered seeing Caleb once in Ava's photos, barely noticeable in the background at a pool bar 2 days before she vanished. At the time, he didn't stand out. Now, he couldn't be ignored. When Navarro's team searched Caleb's home, they found multiple memory cards stashed in a waterproof bag hidden beneath a loose plank in the deck. One card contained photos matching those found on Dylan's laptop. Another held audio recordings, conversations between the 2 men, laughing, planning, recounting their nights with disturbing detail. The theory that Dylan acted alone had unraveled completely. Caleb Rowan was arrested the next morning. His face was pale, his expression hollow, but he offered no resistance. He said nothing as he was placed in handcuffs, but the silence said enough. Ava hadn't just been stalked and killed. She had been hunted by 2 men who had made her suffering part of a twisted ritual. The shallow grave was no longer the end of Ava's story. It was just the beginning of a far larger truth, one that Harper was now determined to expose in full. The arrest of Caleb Rowan sent shockwaves through the island. For weeks, the community had focused on Dylan Cross as the sole suspect, the predator who had slipped beneath their radar, the man who stalked and murdered Ava Delaney. But the discovery of a second individual, someone who had shared in the crimes and possibly encouraged them, shattered the idea that this was a case of one man's twisted darkness. It became clear that what had happened to Ava was part of a longer, coordinated pattern, hidden beneath years of sunlit beaches and easy charm. The island's serenity had masked a far more sinister truth. Detective Navarro worked day and night reviewing the audio files found in Caleb's home. The conversations between Dylan and Caleb revealed a bond built on manipulation, dominance, and a shared hunger for control. They spoke casually about women they'd met, using coded language that now read like confessions. In one recording, Dylan referred to Ava as the one who noticed too much. Another recording revealed Caleb expressing concern about Ava posting too frequently, afraid she might have caught something on video that could identify them. That paranoia, Navarro concluded, may have accelerated their decision to silence her. The prosecution now had a case that involved both men, one who had drawn attention with his charm, and another who had quietly operated in the background. Caleb had no record. He had always been seen as quiet, helpful, and dependable. But behind that facade, he had played a critical role, offering advice, helping with planning, and possibly even covering up after Ava's murder. While Dylan had a reckless streak, Caleb had a calculating nature. It was a dangerous combination. Harper Quinn testified before the grand jury. Her presence was calm but commanding. She recounted Ava's character, her messages in the days before she vanished, and the details of the journal entry about Dylan. Harper's voice never wavered, even when speaking about the moment Ava's body was found. She had come to Maui for answers, but had stayed for justice. The court proceedings became national news. Ava's story captured the attention of people everywhere, not just because of the horror, but because of Harper's refusal to let it be buried with her friend. During the trial, the prosecution presented its full case. The surveillance footage, the fabric strip from Dylan's bungalow, the bleach bottle, the broken wristwatch, the GPS logs, the recovered footage, and the memory cards found at Caleb's home were all entered into evidence. Forensic analysts confirmed that Ava had been drugged with a fast-acting sedative found in her bloodstream. The soil found on Dylan's shoes matched the location of the grave. Phone records showed texts between Dylan and Caleb the night Ava disappeared, including one sent hours after her death that read simply, "It's done." Dylan's defense attempted to argue coercion, that he had been manipulated by Caleb, that he hadn't intended for Ava to die. But the evidence overwhelmed any such claim. Caleb's lawyer remained largely silent during trial, allowing the facts to speak for themselves. The jury deliberated for only 2 days. Dylan was convicted of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and multiple counts related to other victims who had been identified through recovered evidence. Caleb was found guilty of aiding and abetting, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and possession of illegal surveillance material. Both men were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When the verdict was read, Harper sat in the front row, clutching the last photo Ava had sent her, a sunlit selfie by the waves. There were no cheers in the courtroom, only a heavy silence that came from the weight of truth finally spoken aloud. Outside, reporters gathered, but Harper didn't speak. She walked alone along the beach where Ava had once stood, letting the wind carry her thoughts. In the weeks that followed, Harper launched a foundation in Ava's name, dedicated to supporting women traveling alone, providing safety resources, and aiding investigations into cold cases involving missing persons. Tips began flooding in. Survivors shared stories of encounters that mirrored Ava's, and old leads found new light. Though nothing could undo what had been done, Harper had ensured that Ava's story didn't vanish into the sand. She had turned grief into action, heartbreak into change. The beach where Ava once stood smiling would never look the same again. But it stood as a quiet reminder that even in the most beautiful places, darkness can hide, and that sometimes justice begins with the refusal to forget.